The air was thick. You know that kind of silence that feels alive? Like it's holding its breath, waiting for someone to say the thing neither of you are brave enough to say? That's what it was like that night in my kitchen. The clock on the wall was ticking louder than usual. Tick, tock, tick, a sound I've heard 1,000 times before, but that night, it sounded like it was measuring everything. Every breath, every heartbeat, every unspoken word. I stood by the sink, drying a glass I'd already dried twice, just trying to give my hands something to do. Because if they stayed still, they might start shaking. He was standing behind me, not close, but close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body. Not a word between us. Just tension. Humming. Stretching. Curling up the walls like smoke. And the wildest part? It wasn't supposed to be like this. He's my stepson. My husband's boy. 25. Grown. Yes, but still, he's my husband's son. And yet, something had shifted. It didn't happen all at once. No, these things rarely do. They sneak up on you, don't they? One shared smile too many. One lingering touch that you both pretend didn't last a beat too long. One late-night conversation that cuts deeper than it should. And then suddenly, you're standing in your own kitchen, wondering if you're still the same woman you thought you were. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was terrified. Not of him, but of me. Of the part of me that noticed. The part of me that wanted to be noticed back. The part of me that had been quiet for years. And now, suddenly, was wide awake. What do you do when someone sees the parts of you that no one else even bothers to look at anymore? Not out of obligation. Not out of marriage vows. But because they're actually looking, actually seeing. And God, the way he looked at me. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't even overt. But it was undeniable. There was heat behind it, yes, but there was also something else, something gentler. Reverence. Like he was studying a painting he'd never thought he'd see up close. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because it wasn't just lust. It was longing. And longing, when you've been starving emotionally, is far more seductive than anything physical. I wish I could tell you I didn't feel it too. That I shook it off. That I left the room, turned on the lights, washed my hands of the whole thing. But I didn't. I stood there, heart pounding, breath shallow, wondering what would happen if I just turned around. I didn't. Not that night. But the story? Oh, it was just beginning. If you've ever found yourself in that messy, gray space between loyalty and longing, if you've ever felt desire tugging at the edges of your good intentions, you're not alone. Subscribe to Sheila Hart Tales for stories that whisper to the parts of you you've been told to silence. Because here, we don't judge the heart. We listen to it. It didn't start that night in the kitchen. No, it started months before that. Quietly. Gently. Like a whisper behind a closed door that you keep pretending you can't hear. I had just gotten remarried. My second chance. He was a good man, steady, established, dependable. 14 years older than me, with a calmness that felt safe at first. After years of emotional chaos, I thought, this is what I need. Security. Stability. Someone who wouldn't leave. But stability has a way of turning into silence. And silence, when it goes on too long, becomes loneliness. He traveled often for work. Always had. I told myself I didn't mind. That it gave me time to nest. Time to build a home. But deep down, I was still waiting. Not for him to come home. For something else. Something I couldn't name yet. That's when his son moved in. Temporarily, of course. He was polite, never too familiar, never too casual. Always offering to help, never overstepping. But there was a stillness to him. Like he felt everything, but rarely showed it. Like there was a whole world living behind those eyes, and he was only letting me see slivers of it. I noticed the way he moved. Not loud, not sloppy. Controlled. Graceful, even. He moved like someone who had been taught to watch his surroundings carefully. And sometimes, I felt like I was his surroundings. It wasn't anything inappropriate. At first. But I started catching him looking, not staring, Not gawking, just noticing. You can tell when someone sees you out of politeness, and when someone sees you because they can't not. And I could feel it. In little ways. Like the way he lingered in a room just a second too long after I walked in. The way he held his breath when I leaned across the counter. The way his voice softened when he said my name. One night it was late, maybe close to midnight. I was heading to bed after reading in the living room. He was coming from the kitchen, and we met in the hallway. It was narrow, barely enough space for two people to pass without brushing shoulders. We both reached for the light switch at the same time. Our hands touched. Not a graze. Not a bump. His fingers rested against mine. Warm. Still. And we froze. The hallway light was off, but there was enough glow from the moon outside that I could see the outline of his face, his jaw tightening, his eyes watching mine, not daring to move. It was maybe 3 seconds. Maybe less. But time does strange things when you're standing at the edge of a line you know you're not supposed to cross. I pulled my hand back. Not fast, but deliberate. Turned toward my room. Closed the door behind me. And then I stood there. In the dark. Heart pounding. Skin flushed. Like I'd just been touched for the first time in years. Not just touched, felt. Really, deeply, purposefully felt. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that night. My hands still tingled from where his skin had met mine. Not in a sexual way. No. In a way that made me feel alive again. Like a match had been struck in a room I didn't even realize had gone cold. And that scared me. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt so right. So natural. So easy. That's how it always begins, doesn't it? Not with fireworks, but with warmth. Familiarity. A moment so small you could almost convince yourself it meant nothing. But deep down, you know, something is waking up inside you. And no matter how much you try to quiet it, it won't go back to sleep. A few days passed. Nothing happened. Nothing obvious anyway. But you could feel it in the air between us, like the room had learned a new language, and we were both pretending we didn't understand it. We still said good morning. Still passed each other the salt at dinner. Still moved around the house like everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not for me. And I don't think it was for him either. That night, the house was quiet again. It always felt quieter when my husband was away, like the walls missed his voice even if I didn't. I couldn't sleep. Something was stirring inside me, this ache, this tension that had nothing to do with lust and everything to do with being seen. Heard. Felt. I wandered into the kitchen, barefoot, half hoping he'd be there, half praying he wasn't. He was. He was leaning against the counter, a mug in his hand. No lights on, just the refrigerator humming softly and a little slice of moonlight coming in through the window over the sink. He looked over his shoulder when he saw me. Said nothing, just nodded, like he'd been waiting for me. I poured myself a glass of water. Tried to act like I wasn't suddenly aware of every movement I made, how my robe brushed my legs, how the floor was cold under my feet. I stood across from him, both of us quiet. A comfortable quiet this time. Not heavy. Just real. Then I asked him something I hadn't before. Do you miss her? Your mom. He blinked, like I'd caught him off guard. He set the mug down slowly. Thought for a second. Then said no. Not really. I stayed quiet, gave him room. She was cold, he said, eyes low. Everything was about control with her. How clean the house was. How well I behaved. How things looked to other people. But love? Warmth. He shook his head, gave a dry little laugh. She never laughed. Not even when she cooked. That's when I felt it. A pull in my chest. Not romantic. Not sexual. Just human. Deep. Something inside me broke open. He looked up then. Eyes steady. Voice softer. But you laugh when you cook. And I didn't know what to say to that. Because it wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. A memory he was letting me rewrite without knowing I'd asked to. I stared at him. My heart, my breath, my thoughts, everything just paused. Because in that moment, I saw him. Not just as my stepson. Not just as the man who brushed my wrist in the hallway. But as someone still carrying the quiet bruises of a childhood that taught him love was something you had to earn by being small. And suddenly, I wanted to give him something. Not in a way I could explain, but in the way women understand instinctively when we feel pain in someone else's voice and want to fill it with softness. He must have felt me staring, because he smiled. A little. Then he said, "You're quiet." I could have deflected. Could have changed the subject, walked away, made a joke. But I didn't. There is something, I admitted. My voice was so low I barely recognized it, but I'm afraid to know what it means. I didn't look at him right away. I couldn't. I was afraid I'd see something in his eyes I wasn't ready for. Or worse, nothing at all. But when I finally lifted my gaze, he was already looking at me. Not with confusion. Not with shame. But with the same heaviness I felt in my chest. The same knowing. "Me too," he said. And just like that, the kitchen felt warmer. Not from the air. From the weight of what we hadn't said, but both understood. No one moved. No one touched. But something had shifted again. Not in our bodies this time. In our hearts. In our boundaries. In the space where longing begins to take root, not because you want to betray someone, but because you finally realize what you've been missing. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. I don't know what made me say it. Maybe it was the quiet of the kitchen. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not like a boy seeking approval, but like a man who already understood me. Maybe I was just tired of holding it all in. But I spoke. Soft at first, like I was testing the sound of the truth before I let it fully out. "There's something I've never told anyone. Not even your father." He didn't interrupt. He didn't shift uncomfortably or look away. He just waited, like he already knew whatever I was about to say, and needed to hear me say it anyway. Sometimes, I said, I feel invisible. Not because he doesn't love me, but because I've become convenient, predictable, safe. I swallowed hard. I think he stopped seeing me a long time ago. Not on purpose. Just the way people stop noticing a painting on the wall after they've walked by it every day for years. He nodded, slowly. His eyes didn't leave mine. And I went on. I try to remind myself that marriage isn't always about excitement. That this is what maturity looks like. But I paused, the weight of it catching in my throat. But there are nights I lie awake and I can feel this ache inside me. Not for sex. Not even for romance. For attention. For someone to look at me like I matter. Like I'm wanted. Not just loved. I looked down, embarrassed for being so bare. So open. Then I said it. The thing I'd never admitted, even to myself. I had a dream once. About a younger man. He didn't say much, but he listened. Really listened. He was kind, attentive. But there was danger in him too. Not because he'd hurt me, because he knew what I wanted before I did. I let the silence stretch after that. My pulse thudding in my ears. My hands trembling slightly where they rested on the counter. He leaned forward. Not close enough to touch, but enough that I felt the shift in the air between us. "I've had dreams too," he said quietly. His voice wasn't playful. It wasn't teasing. It was honest. Steady. But I wasn't asleep. The words settled over the room like a blanket. Heavy. Warm. Inescapable. And suddenly, we weren't two people sharing confessions anymore. We were two people standing in a truth that had been waiting patiently, hungrily for one of us to name it. I looked at him. Not as my husband's son. Not as someone half forbidden, half familiar. I looked at him as a man. And I knew in that moment, so did he. There was no turning back from that. We didn't touch. We didn't kiss. We didn't move an inch. But something moved inside us. A tether had formed. A pulse between our bodies, steady and undeniable. Like the kind of truth that lives just beneath the skin, waiting to be touched. He didn't need to say anything else. And neither did I. Because now, the truth was between us. Living. breathing. And it wasn't going away. After that night in the kitchen, I couldn't look at him the same. So I didn't look at all. I avoided him. Carefully, strategically, quietly. I changed my routines. Ate meals at odd hours. Closed doors that used to stay open. Kept myself busy with laundry that didn't need doing, wiping down counters that were already clean just to stay out of his orbit. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd see in his eyes if I let myself look again. Afraid of what I'd feel in my body if I stood too close. Afraid that the line we hadn't even crossed would somehow pull me over the edge if I got too close again. Then my husband came home. Same suitcase. Same smile. Same familiar kiss on the cheek like we were old colleagues checking in after a conference. And just like that, life resumed. At least for him. But not for me. Because I wasn't in my life anymore. Not fully. I was somewhere between guilt and longing, drifting through rooms that no longer felt like mine, smiling at a man I used to love in a body that now felt like it belonged to someone else. I watched them, father and son, laughing over coffee one morning. My husband telling a story I'd heard a dozen times. His son laughing, polite, charming, present. And I felt it again. That ache. Not jealousy. Not shame. Something worse. I felt split. Like I was standing in the middle of a life I'd built so carefully, only to realize it had been quietly hollowing out beneath my feet for years, and I hadn't noticed until someone new walked through it and saw me. And I couldn't stop asking myself, am I broken? Or was I just awakened? Because I didn't want chaos. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But I couldn't deny that something inside me had cracked open, and now everything ordinary felt distant, like watching my own life through glass. Every time my husband touched my shoulder in passing, I flinched, not outwardly, but somewhere deep, where truth lives. Because now I knew the difference between being touched and being felt. And that scared me more than anything. I'd lie awake at night next to him, his breathing soft, steady. And I'd think about that moment. The way his son had leaned and said, "I've had dreams too." But I wasn't asleep. I'd press my palm flat against my own stomach and whisper to the dark. What if I liked it too much? What if this wasn't just about being seen, but about being undone? About surrendering to something I couldn't control and didn't want anymore? What if I could never go back to who I was before? That question haunted me, because maybe I didn't want to go back. Maybe the woman I'd been before, safe, loyal, reliable, was a version I'd built to be loved by others. But not by me. And now, someone had touched the part of me I'd hidden even from myself. Not with his hands, but with his presence. And I didn't know how to unfeel that. I started wondering things I never let myself think before. Would I have noticed him if he weren't his son? Would he have noticed me if I weren't married to his father? And worse, did any of that even matter anymore? Because it wasn't about rules. It was about recognition. He saw me. And once you've been seen like that, really, truly seen, the life you had before feels like a stranger's. And I was terrified. Because I wasn't sure I wanted her back. I woke up that morning knowing I couldn't keep pretending. I'd spent weeks hiding behind polite distance, pretending the house wasn't charged with something unspoken. I told myself I was doing the right thing, being mature, being responsible, being loyal. But it wasn't maturity. It was fear. And fear was beginning to feel more dangerous than desire. So I got dressed. Carefully. Nothing suggestive, but nothing forgettable either. Just me. Me on a day when I was done lying to myself. And I asked him if he wanted to grab a coffee. Just that. Simple. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. A small cafe on the edge of town, tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, unremarkable, but far enough from the house that it felt like a different world. A place where we weren't tied to what we were supposed to be. He said yes. He didn't ask why. Didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. We sat across from each other, the little metal table between us. 2 cups of coffee cooling slowly. 2 people who had already said so much without saying everything. The silence wasn't awkward. It was loaded. And I realized this moment wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I looked him straight in the eyes, really looked. And I said it. I'm not going to pretend anymore. He didn't blink. Just watched me. You see me, I said. I've felt it. From the very beginning. The way you listen. The way you notice. The way you make me feel like I exist in full color, not just as someone's wife, someone's routine, someone's placeholder. I took a breath. It trembled, but I didn't stop. And I see you. Not as his son. Not even as someone I should stay away from. But as a man. One who disrupted something in me. Not just my marriage. Me. The words hung there, too real to take back. And I didn't want to. He still hadn't said anything. Just looked at me with this quiet intensity. Steady, calm, present. The kind of presence that makes you feel stripped bare, but never judged. Then I said the part that mattered most. But this is mine now. My choice. I sat up straighter, found my own strength in the center of all that vulnerability. This isn't about temptation. Or fantasy. Or being bad. This is about claiming what I've denied myself for so long, my voice. My needs. My truth. He nodded. Once. Slowly. Like he knew exactly what I meant and had been waiting for me to say it first. We didn't touch. We didn't even move. But I swear, the ground shifted beneath us. Because something had been claimed in that moment. Not possession. Power. Mine. I walked out of that cafe with my heart pounding and my hands cold, but my mind clear for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just his fantasy anymore. It wasn't about him stirring something in me. It was mine now. My desire. My story. My boundary to cross or not. And for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. And I wasn't running anymore. 3 days after the cafe, I sent the text. Just one line. Be home by 8 tonight. No questions. Just trust me. No emoji. No follow-up. Just that. My hands were steady when I typed it. But the moment I hit send, the weight of what I'd done settled over me like fog. Warm. Inevitable. Heavy with knowing. I spent the rest of that day preparing not for him, but for me. Because this time, I wasn't stepping into anything I didn't own. This time, there'd be no pretending. No hiding behind circumstances or excuses. It would be a choice. And it would be mine. I lit the house with intention low lights, golden and warm, like the way afternoon sun filters through sheer curtains. I played music soft enough that it blended with breath. And I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for no real reason at all. Maybe this was the reason. Every movement had meaning. Every detail was a declaration. I am not afraid of wanting. I am not ashamed of being alive. And yet, when the clock crept toward 8, my calm began to shake at the edges. I stood in front of the mirror, touched the hollow of my throat. Watched the way my chest rose and fell. My skin felt electric. Not from vanity, but from presence. I was in myself. Fully. Painfully. Beautifully. When I heard the door click open, my breath caught. I didn't rush to meet him. Didn't hide. I stood still, in the center of the living room I'd lived in 100 ordinary days before this one now transformed into something quiet, charged, and completely mine. Footsteps. Slow. Controlled. I knew it was him by the way the energy shifted, subtle, but undeniable. Like the moment just before a storm when the sky darkens and everything pauses. And still, I didn't move. I let the moment stretch, let the silence bloom between us like smoke. My hands began to tremble. Not from fear. Not even from guilt. But from the gravity of this moment. Because nothing would ever be the same after it. I pressed one hand to my heart, felt it pounding. Felt everything rising to the surface, all the months of silence and almosts and what-ifs. And I whispered to myself, out loud, so I could hear it and believe it. This is my moment. I won't be afraid. Because sometimes, power isn't loud. It isn't angry. It doesn't burn. Sometimes it's soft. Steady. Lit from the inside. And that's what I felt as I turned slowly toward him. Power. Not his. Mine. He stepped in quietly. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. There was something about the way he looked at me, not with hunger, not with possession, but with stillness. Like he already knew this moment wasn't about taking anything, it was about receiving what had been waiting. I met his gaze just long enough to let him see. This wasn't an accident. This was me. Fully aware. Fully awake. I tilted my head toward the living room, a soft gesture, no commands, no explanations. He followed. I led him with silence. Because some things are too sacred for language. The room glowed, shadows dancing softly across the walls. Low music played like a heartbeat in the background, steady, intimate, close. We sat. Not far apart. Not rushed. Just close. Our shoulders touched first. Barely. A brush of fabric. The warmth of skin underneath. And for a while, that was enough. We didn't speak. We didn't look away. Our breath became the rhythm. Quiet. Even. Shared. Then his hand, resting near mine, shifted. Just a fingertip. That's all it took. A single touch to the back of my hand, light as a question. I turned mine over. Answered. Our fingers laced slowly, like they'd always belonged there. No fumbling. No hurry. Just knowing. His thumb moved along the edge of my palm, over the sensitive space beneath my ring finger. And something inside me unraveled softly. There was no tension in his body. No urgency. He wasn't trying to convince me. He was with me. Every motion was reverent. Almost like prayer. He lifted my hand gently, turned it in his, brought it to his lips, and kissed my palm. Not greedy. Not wet. Not performative. Just a kiss. Warm. Still. Deep. My breath caught. Not from shock, but from recognition. Because that moment, the way he touched me like I was something rare, something fragile and valuable, was the moment I realized. It wasn't just about desire. It was about being seen. Really seen. All the parts I'd tucked away, all the longing I'd rationalized, all the years of being touched but not felt. He saw them. Held them. Without fear. We stayed like that, fingers laced, silence wrapped around us, breath sinking. Time lost its edges. He moved a little closer. Our knees touched. Then his forehead gently pressed to mine. Eyes closed. Breath shallow. His scent, his warmth, the shape of him beside me, it all wrapped around me like silk and heat. No one said anything. Because the room didn't need words. It pulsed. Alive with restrained need. A tension so rich, so full, it didn't have to explode to be real. I wasn't lost in him. I was rooted in myself. And he was right there with me. And in that moment, that sacred, charged, impossibly slow moment, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel reckless. I felt whole. For the first time in a very long time. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand moment of surrender. No sweeping kiss that tore through the quiet. No sudden collision. No, what happened between us unfolded like breath. Gradual. Measured. Inevitable. His fingers trailed up my arm, barely touching, but everywhere. And my skin responded before my mind could catch up. My chest rose. Not from panic, but from permission. I looked at him then, not just with my eyes, but with the weight of everything I'd carried for years. All the hunger, all the loneliness, all the questions I'd been too polite to ask. And in his face, there was no fear, only reverence. Like he was watching a flame he'd never dare to blow out. He touched my face gently, as if I might break. I leaned into it, not because I was fragile, but because I was safe. The first kiss wasn't eager. It wasn't rushed. It was aware. Like we both knew this kiss would be different than any we'd ever had. Because it wasn't about conquest. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about recognition. His lips trembled against mine, and mine answered. Soft. Slow. Deep. And then it deepened not because we forced it, but because everything in us leaned toward it. He whispered things into my neck, barely formed words, honest and unfiltered. I see you. You don't have to shrink. You're enough as you are. No one had ever said that to me. Not even my husband. Especially not my husband. And hearing it, feeling it undid me. I wasn't performing. I wasn't trying to be beautiful or desirable or good. I was just there. Open. Raw. Present. And as we moved together, slow, searching, tender, it felt less like sin and more like relief. Every place he touched, I reclaimed. Every sound I made, I allowed. And when we finally collapsed, bodies tangled, breath spent, something in me cracked wide open. I felt tears slide down my cheeks before I even knew they'd begun. Silent. Unstoppable. I turned away, embarrassed. But he pulled me closer, pressing his forehead to mine again. He was crying too. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. There were no explanations to give. No shame left to assign. Just the release. Of years of being unseen. Of longing that had no name. Of hunger mistaken for weakness. It wasn't perfect. We were both shaking. The room was too quiet. The air is too thick. But it was real. And I owned every second of it. I didn't apologize. I didn't pretend I'd been swept away. I chose that moment. And in choosing it, I chose myself. Even through the wreckage of guilt and uncertainty, I felt more alive than I had in years. And sometimes, that's how it starts. Not with a spark, but with a silence so full, it demands to be broken. The morning came quietly. No thunder. No dramatic ending. Just the light, soft and pale, slipping through the curtains like it had every other day. But nothing felt the same. I woke before him. Or maybe he hadn't slept at all. He was already in the kitchen when I padded in. Still shirtless. Barefoot. Steam curled from the mug he placed on the counter before I even asked. He didn't look at me right away. And I didn't push for it. The silence between us, it wasn't awkward. It was full. A kind of holy quiet. Like we were both holding something delicate in our hands, afraid that naming it might make it disappear. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, needing its warmth. Took a sip. Felt it settle deep inside me, grounding me. He finally spoke. His voice was low, careful. Do you regret it? I didn't answer right away, because the word regret felt too thin, too small for what we'd just lived through. I looked at him and shook my head. No, I said softly, but I know this can't last. His jaw tensed for just a moment, then relaxed. He didn't argue, didn't plead, just nodded once like he'd known that truth too, even if he hadn't wanted to admit it. We sat across from each other, coffee between us, the air still humming with everything unspoken. There was no anger, no confusion, only clarity. What we'd shared, it was never meant to be a story of forever. It wasn't about building something. It was about remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be chosen. To be noticed. To be felt, not just seen. We didn't kiss goodbye. There were no whispered promises. No long glances over the shoulder. Just a quiet understanding. That moment, that night, would live in both of us. Not like a wound, but like a mark. A place we'd been that changed the shape of everything that came after. My marriage survived. Barely. He came home. Life resumed. Laundry. Bills. Dinner. But I was never the same. I smiled less often. But when I did, it was real. I didn't fake desire anymore. I didn't shrink myself to keep the peace. I spoke more. Laughed differently. Touched my own skin like it mattered. Because something in me had awakened. Not just as a woman, but as a being, with needs, with truths, with a fire that didn't ask for permission anymore. And though I'll never say his name out loud, I carry him with me, not with shame, but with a strange kind of reverence. Because he didn't save me, he reminded me that I was never lost to begin with. We talk about loyalty like it's always a clean line, like it's a simple, noble thing you choose and stick to. But no one tells you what happens when loyalty to someone else starts to betray your loyalty to yourself. No one teaches us that sometimes the most painful betrayal is not from someone else. It's from the part of you that you keep silencing. I was loyal to the vows, to the house, to the man who gave me safety but forgot to see me. But what about loyalty to my skin? To my breath? To that aching place inside me that just wanted to feel again? What about loyalty to my own aliveness? I know what people will think. That I crossed a line. That I should have held the boundary firmer. That desire isn't reason enough. But if you've ever been so lonely in a room full of love, if you've ever smiled while shrinking inside, if you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered when you disappeared, then maybe you understand. Maybe you've wanted something you knew you couldn't keep, but you reached for it anyway. Just to taste it. Just to remember you could want. Not because you're selfish, but because you're still alive. Because desire doesn't always ask permission. Sometimes it just arrives. Quiet, dangerous, human, and sometimes, for just one night, you let it in. Not to destroy everything, but to remember who you are beneath the layers of who you had to become. So, if this story stirred something in you, even if you're not ready to say it out loud, just know, you're not alone. You're not wrong. You're not broken. You're not bad. You're just real. Leave a comment if this made you feel something real. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Sheila Hart Tales, where stories whisper what your hearts never dared to say out loud. Because here we don't judge the ache. We honor it.